Now it's time to get into the sculpting tool. The sculpting tool is the closest thing we have in Mesh Mixer to working with wax, where we can add, we can remove, and as I've said in the past, what you really need to do is think of this surface as a bunch of triangles. So you're not actually adding like on top of what you have, you're actually just manipulating the triangles that you have. So last time we were working with this one called the Select tool. Now we're going to move over into the Sculpting tool. As you can see, the Sculpting tool has two different options. One is the volume and one is surface. So the volume uses a brush that is a sphere, and the different triangles are dealt with more 3D. Whereas the surface one creates a brush similar to when you're doing your select and you have a brush like this that's selecting triangles on a surface. That's what this one does. So it can come in and do the same kinds of things, but it affects just the surface instead of as a whole. And so I haven't used the surface one a lot. I typically stay in the volumetric one. And so just a brief overview of some of these things. And I'm not trying to say that I'm a whiz with this. I always just kind of play around with them to get the effect that I need. But the brush, this describes what it actually does to the triangles. Okay, the fall off is the shape that it is using as it's making those decisions, those calculations. If you, like for example, if you have a draw tool, or actually let's go to this. No, we'll do the draw tool. And if you go to fallout with the flat, you can see that it pulls. Hold on. Let me get these all to the defaults, uncheck that, and check flow. All right. So that versus on the other extreme, where it's pulling it more central. So you can see one of them's a broader effect than the other one, and depending on the tool that might be more noticeable. Color really only applies if you're using this one right here called Paint Vertex. I don't know of any practical uses for that in dentistry that actually allows you to paint a surface, and you can't tell yet that this surface is being painted. You actually have to go into this painting mode, and you can see that it's painted now. I don't really use that very much, but that's what it's for. Down here, strength determines how intense the effect of your brush is. Size is the brush. Okay, so if I come over here and I change the size, depth, in my understanding, is where in relation to the surface the brush applies itself. So at 0, it's applying it right at the surface, whereas if you go one way, I think if you go to 50, it goes inside the surface. If you go to -50, it goes outside the surface. I don't really mess around much with that. And then laziness, in my understanding, is that if you, let me turn off the wireframe there. If you're dragging across like this and you kick the laziness up, there's a delay. So if you notice with the laziness at 0 and I just go at a pace across here, you can kind of see right as I go across an area, the effect is there. Whereas with laziness, I'll go right next to it. See how I'm dragging across, but it's lagging behind. Okay, so it kind of dulls the effect that you're trying to achieve, the brush that you're trying to use. Symmetry is an interesting one because, and I kind of set this before, but you can click on here and you can change where the symmetry is. Okay, you can move it around, you can turn it. But the idea with the symmetry is that if I take a tool and I use it on one side, notice that it is affecting the other side. And obviously, because I don't have the plane exactly down his head, it's applying a little different. In theory, if you had it directly in the center of his head, anything you change on one side will change on the other, assuming his head is symmetric. That's what the symmetry is. Flow, if I uncheck flow and I just hold down, notice that it only applied the tool one time, whereas if I check flow and I hold down, it continues to over and over apply the tool, so it kind of pulls it up. Volumetric applies if you are working with something very thin. Maybe his ear's thin enough for us to try this out on. But the idea is with it unchecked, if I am clicking right here, it doesn't affect, or it shouldn't be affecting the other side. But it is. So I don't know. I don't know why it's not. Normally, oh, it's because it's too close. Normally I've used this in instances where it's, here, let's see. How can I do this? I'm going to close this hole. I'm going to hollow our bunny out, kind of thin. And then I'm going to plane cut them to give myself something more similar to a denture. Okay, so for example, we've got, let me go back into the tools. The shortcut to sculpting tools is 2 for your volumetric ones and then 3 for the surface ones. So I hit 2 just there. And now let's use maybe a shrink smooth. Okay, and uncheck volumetric. So I should be able to smooth this out without it affecting the inside. And you can see it's not affecting the inside because it's actually going straight through. And so right now I'm smoothing out the inside. I'm going to try a different brush to show you what I mean. So right here where I haven't touched it, I can grab right here, and that's pulling outward on this. I'm going to switch it over to this one. It's pulling outward on this, but notice that it doesn't affect. Wait a second. Oh, sorry. I forgot to uncheck the box. All right, here we go. It shouldn't affect the inside as long as that is not checked. And if it is checked, then you can see that the effect is going through to the other side. Okay, right there, it's bulging out. Okay, same thing right here. You know, so as long as the triangles on the inside are touching the sphere, they're going to be affected if that is checked. Sim snap, I don't understand. I've tried to look that up. I don't really understand what it's talking about. Real quick, I'm just going to delete that bunny and get us a new one. All right, back into here, refinement. If you uncheck enable refinement, turn on our triangles, and come in and use this draw tool, and what you can notice, I'm going to kick the strength up. What you can notice is that as this gets pulled out further and further, okay, or maybe this drag one would be a good example. I have to uncheck that. Notice that when I pull that up, see how the triangles are staying the same, but they're being stretched, versus if you enable refinement and you do the same thing, see how the triangles are changing as it comes out. So that's kind of the big difference between the two. It's going to undo those. That is the value in doing the enable refinement. This simply changes how much, and then if you do this one, the reduce, it reduces. Like especially if you're going to smooth something out, okay, and you want to enable refinement, then you will see, let's see, reduce, refine. You can see that it's really making a big difference on those triangles. Smoothing is how much it smooths as it goes, and adaptivity, as usual, that typically applies to trying to preserve shape. filters here on the bottom, a fixed boundary, we can see here at the bottom. I'm going to turn this off, the grid. Notice here on the bottom how my border is changing as I use that tool. Or if I come in and I take this and I start dragging this, see how it's affecting the boundary? Well, if I click fixed boundary, now if I go on the other side and I grab right here next to it and I pull that out, see how it's holding my boundary in place? Okay. Or if I come along and I'm using the draw tool, see how it's holding that boundary in place? That's what that's doing. And then the groups, I have to make a group first so you can see what's going on with the groups. We're going to make a group, and then we're going to come back into here and notice that if I say preserve the group, I can do like this and the group stays. You can see the triangles can potentially change depending on which tool you're using, but restrict to group is a little different because now if I start over here in the green, it doesn't cross over. If I start in the gray and I start using a tool, notice it holds it right there. Okay, so that kind of locks the edge of that group. And again, let's show object browser, delete, bring in a new bunny, hit 2, we're right back where we started. So that's the different kind of common things that you're going to see. These different tools, I already used this one. This one shows that you can click and pull. Okay, so it's a fairly nice way of coming along and making a shape. It's like having a thing of clay in front of you and you can like pull out and push in on things. And so it's a very, very quick way to deform an object. This one here works fairly well as also. It's probably the one I use the most just because I can go along and I can paint and add, and if I need to, you know, make something smaller, let me recheck the refinement tool. And so let me hit those to defaults. All right, so this is normally how it works, is I can come along here, and even if I'm going with something smaller, if you go like this and you're like, whoa, it's getting away from me, I drag the strength down. Okay, that works pretty well for me to gain control again over my deforming. The laziness shouldn't be there. Hold on. Let's the laziness down to 0. All right, so you can see that now I can drag around and it doesn't get away from me. Okay. Let's undo. So that's those ones. Oh, and then some of these tools, I can't say which it works for and which it doesn't. I just know some that it does. Is notice that if I click on the draw tool, okay, and I'm going to check flow. If I click on the draw tool, it comes away from the surface, but if I hold down control, see how it does the opposite? So one of them pulls outward, one of them pushes inward. And my understanding is that with these particular tools, what's happening is it is taking an average of the normals of all the triangles in the selection, and it's taking an average and pulling in that direction. And so that's why if I click on a set of triangles, you can kind of see that they just kind of get pulled towards the center of my sphere. A similar one, but slightly different, is inflate. So what inflate does is and notice that these have settings that are, I'm going to take off the refinement here. And with this one, the idea is each triangle supposedly is moving along its normal. Okay, so it kind of blows up a little bit more rather than pulling in a direction. Okay, go back a little bit. All right. Draw was the one where it's like adding wax. Draw 2 does the same thing, but it's a little just more intense on how it does it. Flatten supposedly takes the different vertices, the different XYZ points, and that are within the brush, and it brings them all towards a plane. And so if I hold down on that for a little bit, then you can see how it creates a flat plane. And that plane is kind of like right at the surface, right in the center of that brush. Okay, you can kind of see where the brush is. Right in the center, it creates a plane. I'm guessing they use the normals across the whole area to create that plane. So like if you had these ones right here, you can flatten out his snout a little bit because it takes that average of them all. So that's the flatten tool. Pinch takes all the triangles, not triangles, but the vertices, and it pulls them inward. Okay, so see how if I hold down in one spot, everything starts moving kind of towards one spot. That's nice, especially if you're kind of moving along, because you can create kind of a crease, especially if you change the fallout to here and you come into an area where you want to refine. So like grooves, like if you're doing some work to create grooves on a, let me turn this off, grooves on a tooth. See how it's kind of pinching and creating a nice little seam there? So that is nice for that purpose. Moving, I understand, is similar to the drag, but it's a little harsher. Okay, it doesn't do it as nice as with as much finesse. Spikes pull really, you can kind of see that I'm just kind of pulling on these, and if you hold down on one, it really, you know, goes nuts. So that's the spikes. And so if you wanted to, you know, I don't know about in dentistry when you would do that, but I think with the spikes you can also, you can also hold down control. So, you know, maybe that's a way to get some stippling in there. I already talked about the paint, and in the previous video I talked about attract. These are three different types of smooth. So bubble smooth smooths by slightly, it smooths and at the same time pulls toward the brush, whereas shrink smooth does the opposite, that it smooths, but while it does, it kind of goes in. The manual claims that this is most like smoothing in other programs. And then the last one here is robust smooth, which is really going nuts with the refinement here. And so you can see that this, it's still like a shrink smooth, but it just does it with a little less, it's like a little less aggressive, okay? And then these ones, we'll have to turn on the wireframe so you can see what's going on here. But this one you can see is refine, so it's adding triangles. So you can kind of see right here that it's coming along and adding triangles. But notice in these areas here, it's not doing anything. And notice that right here, it reaches a point where it stops working. But if I change the size of the brush, then it will start working again, because the tool works off of a % of the size of the brush. So the smaller the brush, the more refinement you see. You can also play around with these and go even and more nuts with it. And then the reduce is the opposite. If I choose the reduce option, now I can come through and reduce the amount of triangles. And if I get the really, really big, you can see that it now is reducing it even more. And like I said, you can play around with the refinement and change that as well. Adaptive is supposedly, it does it more by trying to maintain a shape. So you can see as I came through here to smooth, it tries to hold that crease angle there. So that's a nice option for changing the triangles. Zipper I already talked about when we were showing the weld boundary tool. Secondary brushes, notice this is the bubble smooth, the shrink smooth, and the robust smooth. So if I want my robust smooth to be an option, so like if I, let's say, and it's, let me go back. Secondary brush, you hold down shift to activate it. So say I've got my draw tool, but I want to also have access to smoothing without going over and changing it. I can come along and I can pull on this. Let me kick the strength up. I can come along and pull on this, sorry, where I'm doing like this, but then if I hold down shift, now suddenly I can do my robust smoothing, which I can take the strength down a little bit on that. But that's the idea, is you hold down shift and you can access a second brush easily. The other thing that I'll note is, notice if I use the drag and then I use the draw and then I use the flatten, notice that I can use my arrow keys and I can move through those. See that? It maintains a history of brushes. And so if there's like 3 that you use all the time, you can be quickly switching between those by using the arrow keys. Okay. And then I think it's, what is it, like control? Let's see, it's either shift arrow or control arrow. Maybe is it shift arrow? Yeah. So if you notice the shift arrow kind of goes in between all the different brushes. See how I look up here. Notice as I'm doing that, it's switching between the brushes, and I can go there we go. So it's shift and arrow will go in between the brushes, and thought it was doing something else. Somehow it looked like the fall off was changing, but anyway, so that's another option that you have. So that gives you a real good idea on what all this is. I already talked about the fall off, the color, all these different things. If you switch over to the surfaces, you'll notice that a lot of these are the same, but draw 3 gets yet another one, another draw, and draw max takes it one step further. Smoothing color is if you were using the painting and then you want to like do a blur between them, that's what that's for. Again, not too useful in dentistry. One thing that comes out in the surface that wasn't there before is these stencils. So give me 1 second. I'm going to delete that guy and bring in a new bunny. And I want to show you what these stencils can do. So coming into the stencils, notice that this right here is meant to be a circle. Okay, I'm not doing this the way I intended. Give me 1 second. Undo. What I wanted to do is turn it on. I'm going to change this to draw max. This is the stencil, and the fall off I want it to be flat. Okay, and notice that when you do that, it kind of takes that and just pulls it straight up. Now obviously if you change the fall off, it's going to create a different shape, and if you use a different stencil, notice this one has a harsh border to it, whereas this one it's kind of pulling more in the center. And so let me undo. The other thing I want you to impress on you is that the resolution or the size of the triangles matters. This is one that I created, a stencil that I created, and you can see that it doesn't really do a very good job. You can't tell what's going on, and that's because I'm starting with such large triangles that I'm not seeing that resolution. So I'm just going to go into, I'm going to undo first. I'm going to come into this, and I am going to, let's see, reduce some of this. I guess I could get a smaller brush size. I'm going to take here. I'm going to take an area like this, and I'm going to remesh it. Okay, we've already talked about remeshing before, and I want there to be a transition on my remesh, so I'm going to kick that up, and then the density I'm going to go, there's a relative density, so you can see it's just going, it's making the inside of that smaller and smaller. Relative density, and let's go target edge length. Still, we want our transition there. The transition just talks about what's happening here at the centers, but I'm going to make this smaller, and hopefully it's something that we don't have to wait forever for. But we want very small triangles to work with here. Okay. Oh, that's pretty small. Okay. So, and let me hit clear selection. So I'm going to turn this off. So it looks the same, but we know that there's a lot more triangles on there. And now if we go into that same situation and we make this large brush, we click 1 time on it, And I'm going to undo. That worked really well, but I want my brush to be a little smaller than that. Maybe right there, okay? So notice that now I can emboss onto this nice area that would print with my name on it. Is it, you know, perfect? No. Is it kind of weird looking? A little bit, but that might be enough. And with this one, if you hold down Control and you do it again, here, you can make it go into the object. And so that's one way, like a quick way. If you just had your logo and you just wanted to easily be able to punch it on there, that's one way. What I would recommend after you've done that, since you've got all these triangles, is to go and reduce the triangles back to where you had them before. To do that, you might want to kind of create a selection that doesn't involve where you just added all that. You know, like I just kicked the crease angle threshold up. I can take it down and go smaller. Actually, take it down all the way since I'm not close to. And I can grab this area here. And now that I don't have anything here, and I can maybe shrink it away from that a little bit, hold down Shift and less than. And so it kind of comes away from that. And now I want to include all these edges though. We'll try using our reduce tool and see if we get what we're after. So we'll hold down Shift R for reduce, and don't need to preserve. Kick the percentage up. The other thing that you can do, I'm going to hit accept. I'm going to create a face group, and you can come into the tools we just learned, and you can go into this one that says reduce, and under filters you can say I want to preserve, I want to keep it in the group, and then you can, you know, come through here like this, and you can see that we've effectively screwed it up. Hold on. I shouldn't have left that boundary one checked. It works for some things, but not for others. So let's see. Let's back up to here. This is the reduce. Let's hit accept. That's all jacked up. You gotta watch it sometimes with tools, preserve boundary. That's where it got screwed up, is when I did that. All right, back to here, in here, filters, down to here. That should give us what we needed. I wish it had a way to do a better transition right there. But let's get rid of that, turn these off, and you can see it's a little messy around the edges. So that's just kind of an intro into what the stamping tool does. I don't really use this stamping tool a lot, but it does give you an idea. The way you do this, the way you make your own, is you just open up a program, and where you want the logo to be, make it in white, and make the background, it has to be a square. Make the background black, and make it a 256 by 256 is what I would recommend. And then save it out as a PNG. And then when you're back over in here and you're using that tool, you just click right here and then find that PNG file and bring it in, and it'll save it in there for you. So hopefully that helps you understand the sculpting better. You can do some pretty fantastic things with sculpting. If you got online and looked around, you'd see that some people are quite talented with this tool and have done some amazing things. So enjoy.